Everything you think you know about NASA going back to the moon is probably wrong. This is not Apollo 2. 0. There will be no single heroic landing and no triumphant return parade. Instead, NASA is executing a multi-decade construction project that begins in lunar orbit, moves to the surface, and is explicitly designed so that humans never have to leave. The Artemis program is infrastructure, not exploration, and understanding that difference changes everything about how you see what comes next. Apollo was a mission with a finish line, a flag planted, and a capsule splashing down in the Pacific. Artemis has no finish line. It has a foundation. The goal is not to visit the moon, but to occupy it permanently with systems that compound on each other over years. Power grids, habitats, landing pads, resource extraction, all of it layered together like a city being built from scratch. That kind of ambition requires a staging post, a fixed point in space where everything connects before it ever touches the surface. Before any astronaut sets foot on the lunar surface, something has to be waiting in orbit. That something is the Lunar Gateway, a small modular space station circling the moon. It isn't a destination in itself. It's the hub that makes everything else possible. Gateway sits in a highly elliptical orbit that swings close to the moon and then far out into space. That orbit was chosen deliberately because it's fuel efficient and keeps the station accessible from both Earth and the surface. Crews traveling from Earth will dock here first before transferring to a lander. Cargo and equipment can be staged here, ready when they're needed on the ground. Gateway also carries science instruments and communications hardware that extend NASA's reach across the lunar region. Think of it the way you'd think of a deep-sea platform. You don't live there permanently, but nothing gets done without it. Without Gateway, every mission to the surface would have to carry everything from Earth every single time. Getting from lunar orbit down to the surface is not a short hop, it's a carefully engineered descent. NASA awarded the job to SpaceX, whose human landing system is a lunar variant of the Starship rocket. The vehicle docks with Gateway, astronauts transfer aboard, and then the descent begins toward the moon. Starship HLS is enormous compared to the Apollo lunar module that carried Neil Armstrong down decades ago. It stands roughly 50 meters tall and carries far more cargo than any previous crewed lander ever could. The descent engine fires, the craft drops through the vacuum, and the landing legs absorb the final impact. Once on the surface, Starship becomes a temporary habitat, a launch pad, and a cargo elevator all at once. NASA is also funding backup lander concepts from Blue Origin, keeping competition alive for future missions. The goal is redundancy, because no single point of failure can be allowed this far from home. The moon is a big place, but NASA didn't choose the South Pole by accident or convenience. Craters near the pole sit in permanent shadow, never touched by sunlight for billions of years. Inside those craters, temperatures drop low enough to trap water ice in the soil and rock. That ice is the most valuable resource on the moon because water becomes oxygen, and oxygen becomes rocket fuel. Beyond the ice, certain ridgelines near the pole receive almost continuous sunlight across the lunar year. Solar panels placed there could power a base without the 2-week blackout that plagues other lunar sites. The combination of frozen water below and reliable sunlight above makes the South Pole uniquely survivable. No other location on the moon offers both. Of those things in the same neighborhood, that's not a preference. It's a hard engineering requirement for any base meant to last. The first astronauts to land under Artemis won't be planting a flag and heading home after a few hours. They're arriving with a checklist that reads more like a construction foreman's than an explorer's. Every hour on the surface is mapped against specific mission objectives that build towards something permanent. They'll survey the exact terrain where future hardware is scheduled to land, checking for slopes, loose regolith, and shadow patterns. They'll deploy early sensor packages that begin feeding data back to mission planners on Earth. They'll test the suits, the tools, and the procedures that later crews will depend on to stay alive. And they'll do all of this knowing that the things they leave behind matter more than the footprints they make. Each mission in this phase adds another layer, another anchor point in the growing foundation. The South Pole site won't look like much after that first landing, but it won't look untouched either. Every system on that base, every heater, every oxygen pump, every radio signal home runs on electrical power. The moon's south pole gets sunlight at shallow angles, and long polar nights can last for weeks at a stretch. Solar panels alone can't carry the load through those dark stretches reliably. That's why NASA is developing a small fission reactor, a nuclear power unit compact enough to land on a rocket. The Fission Surface Power Project has already tested reactor components here on Earth, and the results are promising. A single unit could deliver around 40 kilowatts, enough to run a small research station continuously. Solar arrays would still play a role, handling peak demand during the long, sunlit periods near the pole. But the fission reactor is the backbone, the system that keeps the base alive when the sun disappears. Together, these two sources create a layered power grid that doesn't depend on any single point of failure. That kind of redundancy isn't a luxury out there. It's the difference between a functioning base and a frozen one. The moon is not as empty as it looks, and NASA is counting on that. Billions of tons of water ice sit locked inside permanently shadowed craters near the lunar South Pole. That ice isn't just drinking water. It's the raw material for everything the base needs to survive. By splitting water molecules with electricity, engineers can produce pure oxygen for the crew to breathe every single day. The same process releases hydrogen, which combines with that oxygen to make rocket propellant right there on the surface. This approach has a name: in situ resource utilization, or living off the land. Lunar regolith, the fine dust and rock covering the surface, also holds oxygen bound tightly inside mineral compounds. Heating that regolith to extreme temperatures releases the oxygen, giving the base a second production pathway if the ice supply runs short. Every kilogram produced on the moon is one less kilogram launched from Earth, and that math changes everything about what a permanent base can actually become. The moon is not a place that tolerates mistakes in engineering or materials. Surface temperatures swing more than 500 degrees Fahrenheit between lunar day and brutal night. Radiation from the sun and deep space hits the surface with almost nothing to stop it. Micrometeorites travel at speeds that would punch clean through ordinary walls without warning. NASA's answer to all of this is a layered habitat design built for long-duration human survival. The structures being developed combine rigid pressure vessels with thick regolith shielding piled on by robotic systems. That regolith layer, mined from the surface itself, becomes the primary barrier against radiation and thermal extremes. Inside, modular compartments separate sleeping, working, and life support systems, so a single failure can't cascade through everything. The most critical design requirement isn't comfort or efficiency, it's redundancy at every level of the structure. Crews living inside these habitats won't feel the moon's hostility, but the walls around them will be working constantly. Moving across the moon is nothing like walking through a parking lot on Earth. The terrain is uneven, the dust is abrasive, and a single misstep in a pressurized suit can end a mission. NASA's answer to this challenge is a fleet of purpose-built rovers designed for the lunar South Pole. The first is an unpressurized vehicle, essentially an open buggy that astronauts ride while suited up. The second is far more ambitious: a pressurized cabin on wheels where crews can travel for days without wearing suits. These long-range rovers extend the operational radius of the base by hundreds of kilometers. Cargo logistics rely on a separate class of robotic vehicles that haul equipment between landing pads and construction zones. Every delivery, every supply run, every equipment transfer follows a planned route across mapped terrain. The entire surface operation is choreographed before a single boot touches the regolith. The honest answer is that this will take decades, not a single dramatic mission. The first Artemis landing plants a flag, but it doesn't build a base, not even close. What it does is prove the surface systems can support human life for a short stay. From there, each successive mission adds a layer: a habitat module, a power node, a pressurized rover dock. By the early 2030s, NASA's plan calls for a small crew to stay for roughly 30 days at a stretch. That's not permanent, but it's a critical rehearsal for everything that follows. The real turning point comes when in situ resource utilization goes live, meaning the base starts producing its own oxygen and water from lunar regolith. Once that happens, the cost of keeping people there drops dramatically. A fully operational outpost, one that runs year round with rotating crews, is realistically a 2040s target. That's a long horizon, but every phase builds on the last in ways that can't be skipped. The moon is not a destination, it's a doorstep. And what lies beyond it changes everything. Every gram of water ice mined from the lunar poles is fuel that never had to leave Earth. That single fact rewrites the economics of every mission beyond the moon entirely. Telescopes on the far side of the moon would hear the universe without Earth's radio noise cluttering the signal. Gravity 1/6 of Earth's makes launching deeper missions cheaper, faster, and far more practical. Pharmaceutical research in low gravity could produce compounds that simply cannot form in Earth's environment at all. Strategically, the nation that builds durable infrastructure on the moon sets the terms for everyone who follows. This isn't about planting a flag and walking away like we did before. It's about staying, building, learning, and turning the moon into the first permanent outpost of an interplanetary civilization.